Bob Cano, and on this episode of the Camp Chaos Chronicles, we're going to get this 1978 International Loadstar 1600 grain truck that hasn't run in 11 years, starting, running, and driving. And after the Texas XJS debacle, this one's going to be a piece of cake. I said that out loud, didn't I? Now the focus of most of our attention is going to be right here from the firewall forward. And the most prominent feature, of course, is the engine. This is an International 345 cubic inch cast iron V8, which was built from the 1960s to the late 1980s, I believe. It's got a 2-barrel Holley carburetor. Because this is a 1978 vehicle, it's got breaker point condenser ignition, so that's really very simple, and a very good engine. Every international vehicle, whether it was a Scout or a chassis for a well drilling rig, had this engine in it for the most part. They had 304 cubic inch varieties and some smaller, but this thing was a real workhorse. If you went to school in the 1960s, 70s, and early 80s, this is probably what got you there. So it's been a great engine. It's pretty thirsty, but it's a really good low RPM, high torque engine. Now the issue with this one is that in 2010 we decided that we were going to quit farming, because it got to the point where we could actually rent it out, the farm that is, and earn just about as much money as we can make working it. So that's, that kind of math isn't real hard to calculate. Interesting thing is, the last load of the last season, on the return back to the farm, this thing started developing a knock. And it was high up in the engine, and it sounds like a piston pin bushing in the connecting rod situation. So this engine is wounded. So what we're going to have to do at some point is pull it out and fix whatever the problem is. It's easy enough to find parts and not cheap, but this is a good truck. It was bought by my father in 1980, the same year we bought our John Deere 6600 combine, and of course we used it to haul grain from the farm to the elevator, and it just was a really good truck. The only issue we ever had with the thing, the only major repair, is that we broke one of the axles at one point, and it was down for a couple of days while we fixed that. But in terms of the rest of the vehicle, really great. And I have come into full possession of it now. Bought the other 2/3 from my two brothers, and we're going to do a little work on this. We're going to get her back in shape and actually use it for a little bit of work around this place. So let's get this thing started. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to start dealing with the fuel system, because what we want to be sure of is that we've got a good, clean source of fuel to the engine as soon as we can possibly do that. Now, we've got two fuel tanks. We've got the auxiliary tank and we got the standard tank right here. Now, the auxiliary, that's completely empty. However, taking a sniff in that filler neck right there, there's fuel in there, and that fuel's been in there for a long time. So what we're going to do is we're going to take a piece of clear plastic hose and insert it down into the fuel tank. Now the clear part is a really important part of this, because of the fact that you want to be able to see what's coming out of there. Because what you don't want to do is drink a whole lot of that fuel, because you can get something called chemical pneumonia, which I understand is not a very good thing. So you want to be able to see this stuff. Another thing is, if this is as rancid as it smells, you get some of that in your mouth, you won't be able to taste your food for a couple of days. It's pretty rancid. So, yep, there's fuel in there. So we're going to let that empty out. Now we could have a little left in there. We're going to put 4 gallons of clean fuel in, so whatever's left will be diluted to the point where it really shouldn't have any effect. The next thing we're going to do with the fuel system, or we've already done it actually, is right here in the front of the engine, we've installed a brand new fuel filter. Even though the one that was on there, I blew through it and it was perfectly clear, it's nice to be able to see when you got fuel showing up, so that there's no question that your fuel pump is pumping fuel. Plus, you know, it's been 11 years, probably a good idea. The next thing that we're going to do here is I've numbered all the spark plug wires 1 through 4 on both sides, and we will at this point pull all the plugs out. Now, hopefully, I mean, it's been a long, ooh, easy. Sometimes spark plugs in old engines can be really difficult to remove. And there we go. Oh, take a look at this. There is no center electrode in that spark plug. Wonderful. And yet it ran. Well, it has 7 others. I'm not going to have you follow me along removing all 8 spark plugs. But what we're going to do is we're going to take an oiler, an oil can, and we're going to shoot a couple of shots of oil in each one of the spark plug holes, so that when we try to start the engine, we can make sure that the cylinders are lubricated properly, because those have been sitting dormant for 11 years. They're going to be pretty dry. What we're going to do at this point is pay a little attention to the ignition system to maximize the probability this is going to kick off right away. One of the first things we're going to do is we're going to pull the high tension lead, which is the wire that runs from the coil to the center of the distributor. And what we're going to do is we're going to ground that, because when you're running power through an ignition system like this, what you want to do is you want to allow that coil to discharge, because otherwise you could damage the coil. And I'm just going to go to one of the bolts. I'm going to go to this bracket on the coil, scrub it around a little bit, make sure we got good contact. There we go. And then what I'm going to do is pop the distributor cap off. And they are usually held on by either screws, you can get up from the top, or in this case, there's a couple of these spring clamps that if you grit your teeth and apply enough pressure, kind of hurts when you do this. Yeah, we got this one off on this side first, and there we go. And what we're going to do is we're going to take a Dremel, this rotor right here, right there, that thing. What that does is it distributes, hence the name distributor, electricity to all these 8 electrodes around the outside of the interior distributor cap. I'm going to take a Dremel, and clean all those off until they're bright and shiny. Same thing to the center of the cap, and also the end of the rotor, and the little spring in the middle like that. The reason we're doing that is to get rid of corrosion and carbon that and other stuff that would tend to restrict the flow of current. And then what I'm going to do is pull this little dust cover off, pop the rotor in there. Now these are the breaker points right here. Now what happens is when these breaker points are closed, battery voltage 12 volts can then go to the coil and charge it up. But these points have to open, and they have to open cleanly to enable that field to collapse in the coil and send high voltage to the distributor and then to a spark plug, a particular spark plug. So what we're going to do is we're going to rotate the engine into position. Now you won't be able to see this, but the points are opening at this point, and then I'm going, okay, they're closed right now. So what I'm going to do at this point is take a little piece of sandpaper. Now what I've done already is I've checked the gap. It has to be a specific gap, the points that is. So we have to check that, which we've already done. And then we take a piece of sandpaper and put it in between the points. It's kind of difficult to do from my side and have you see it. Okay, and they're in between there like that, and you just kind of chug back and forth with the sandpaper until you think you got two clean surfaces. And then you can just open it up, and it's going to be impossible for you to see this with a hand in the way, but they're nice and clean at this point. They do need to be replaced. You can tell that because there's quite a bit of pitting on the points, but that's as good as it's going to be. Make sure that these wires are securely attached to the binding post here in the points. This is a condenser which serves to, when the points open, it absorbs current that would otherwise jump across the gap. And the reason that you need that is that you need a clean break in the voltage, that the field in the coil can collapse very rapidly. So what we're going to do then is we're going to very quickly put this back together. That's as good as it's going to be for the time being. Be sure you don't forget this. It happens a lot. People, you know, car won't start, and you find this thing sitting on a bench. So put that in. Make sure it's seated down all the way. Okay, and then replace the cap. And there's a key on the cap. You rotate it a little bit, and it will seat. Put the two spring clips back in place. The other one, oh, there it is. And there we go. I think an important thing when an engine's been sitting a long time, it's a very important thing for you to grab a hold of the fan or put a wrench on the end of the crankshaft and turn the engine over, which this one is doing very easily, at least 2 complete turns. Because if an engine has been sitting a long time, you could have, first of all, the piston rings could be rusted to the cylinders, which is a bad thing, but if they're not, you could actually have valves that are seized, that are rusted, stuck. And as you turn the engine over with the starter, what you could actually do is have rods bend, rocker arms break, that sort of thing. But if you can turn it over easily and you don't feel any interference as you're rolling it over for 2 revolutions, because it takes 2 revolutions for all 8 cylinders to go through, or all 4 phases of the power cycle, then you know that you don't have that problem. So we could go ahead and spin this thing over. Now, the next thing we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and put fuel in it. Another thing I'm going to do is take this ketchup container full of gasoline, and I'm going to insert it into the vent on the fuel bowl. And we're going to give the fuel bowl a good drink of fuel so that the carburetor doesn't have to wait for fuel to get to it from the tank to actually get it running. Okay, and it's starting to bubble out the accelerator pump. Linkage area. Okay, and what I'm going to do now is actually just go ahead and dump a little down there. Now, the fact is that most of that I just dumped down there is going to just come right out of the spark plug holes, but whatever. Okay, now at this point, we are ready to spin this thing over. Now, we're doing that not to try to start it. What I'm doing is trying to get fuel to show up here at the fuel filter, and also oil pressure to show up at the oil pressure gauge. And if we can do that, we know that we can try to get this thing started without having any damage being done to the engine. The key is getting oil to the crankshaft, to the bearings, and have it slung off onto the cylinders. So I think we're ready to give this thing a spin. Now Bill, my trusty cameraman, is going to be looking at the fuel filter to determine if we've got fuel showing up or not. So just give me a yell when that happens, okay? Nothing? Nope. Well, we should have had fuel showing up by now, and we haven't. So my concern is that the screen in the fuel tank is plugged up. So what I'm going to do is I got my compressed air tank here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take and shoot some compressed air back to the tank. And yeah, you could hear that that it's actually going all the way back in the tank. It was a little bit wet when I pulled it off, but not satisfied. And so get that clamp back on. That fuel smells so rancid. I mean, even though we got most of it out, there's still enough in the line that you can still smell it. What I'm also going to do at this point is I'm going to pull this hose off the inlet to the fuel filter, and I'm going to pour fuel down the inlet to the fuel pump, so that we might be able to perhaps prime that a little bit to get it going. Now at this point, I don't think I'm going to spin it over with the plugs out any longer. I think I'm going to put the plugs in, wire them all up, connect the coil back up to the distributor, and then see if we can get it to run by dumping a little fuel down the carb, and hopefully that'll get things going. The oil pressure never showed up on the oil pressure gauge, and you know, sometimes that doesn't happen until the engine gets running. I know on a Jag V12 it takes 5-6 seconds for the oil to get to the crankshaft and show pressure on the gauge. So I think it's smart if we were to just take this and try to get it started at this point. So to summarize, we've got fuel in the tank, we've primed the pump to the degree that we can, the fuel pump. We've got the fuel bowl filled with fuel. We dumped a little down the intake side. We got all the plugs in. They're all wired up correctly. We did a quick and dirty tune-up on the points and the distributor cap and rotor. This thing ought to fire. The goal will be to get it firing and get oil pressure. That's the big thing. And then we need to get fuel showing up at our fuel filter right here. If the fuel doesn't show up at the fuel filter after we blew out the lines and we got new fuel in there, and if it doesn't show up there, the probability is we've got a bad fuel pump. So let's give this thing a try, see what happens. We have fuel. Okay, so it'll run until the fuel bowl mean, it's not even smoking anymore. The smoke that you saw was all that oil being burned out of the cylinder. So, no fuel still. Alright. Well, didn't like that much. Okay, so at this point what we've got is an engine that runs and idles really, really well. The problem is we've got no fuel showing up at the fuel gauge. Now, there's one thing that we may want to try, and that is, I mean, it could be that the float, needle, and seat are stuck to the point where the fuel can't push up here. So we'll give that a try. If all else fails, beat on it with a wrench. Now what that is, basically, it's like a toilet tank valve. You know, you flush the toilet, it picks up a valve, the water goes out of the tank, the valve shuts when all the water is out, and then this valve, this bulb goes down, it's a float, goes down in the tank, turns on a valve, and then when it reaches a certain level, it shuts off the valve. It's the exact same thing here. Sometimes when these have been sitting for a long time, they stick. And if you hit them with something, with sensitivity, sometimes they spring free. So we're going to give this another shot. If I can find my little bottle of fuel. Okay. And we'll fill this up again. Okay. This spritz down the inlet. There we go. The good news is, as I said, we've got oil pressure. The other thing is, the knock is not real evidence. So what that means is we should be able to yard drive this thing, move it around until we get time to actually pull the engine out and actually overhaul it or fix this one. But yeah, I'm pretty pleased with what I'm seeing so far. I got at least one cylinder that's not online, so now I'm going to try one more thing until I go to the expense and trouble of replacing the fuel pump. I blew out the fuel line all the way back from the pump back to the tank. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to take the lines loose from the pump up to the carburetor and do the same thing. I don't hold out a lot of hope that that's going to solve anything, but you know, that's one last thing we can do before we start spending money. But I'm pretty impressed so far. I'm encouraged that this thing can do what we need it to do short term. So, well, so far I'm encouraged because it does run really well. It idles smoothly. I think we got all 8 cylinders on board at this point. The carburetor seems to be working just as well as it did the day that we parked the thing 11 years ago. The issue is fuel supply. I think we've got an obstruction somewhere between the fuel pump and there's a fuel tank selector valve on the floor of the truck, and then back to the tank. So what I'm going to have to do at some point, probably this week sometime, is to take that all apart, blow it out, and you know, including the valve and so forth, to make sure that we are obstruction free. But at this point, what I've done, just to determine whether the pump is working or not, if you look down below there, I've got the YouTube car show standard go-to for when you've got a when you've got to very quickly come up with a running engine and be able to move it around to demonstrate that you got a running vehicle. So if we can get fuel showing up here at the fuel filter, the pump's okay. And then all we have to do is strap that tank in place somewhere and we've got a running vehicle. So we're gonna give it a little, one more drink from the bottle. Just a little. Okay. Okay, next step is we're just going to go ahead, because we want to run this today because I said we were. What I'm going to do is put that fuel tank up here, plumb it directly to the fuel filter, and we got ourselves an old-fashioned Model T style gravity-fed fuel system, which is fine for what we're doing today. Here's our last ditch effort to get this thing running today. We've got our fuel tank up higher than the carburetor, so it's going to be feeding fuel directly by gravity to the fuel float needle and seat valve in the carburetor, and that's going to regulate the level in the carburetor. So it should operate normally. And as you can see, we've got this zip tied in with not just one zip tie, but since we've always got an eye towards safety around here at Camp Chaos, we have 2 zip ties. Okay. Well, you can still hear the knock. But I'm wondering if, I mean, it sounds like it's coming from in the valley where the camshaft and the lifters are, so I'm wondering if we might just have a collapsed lifter. Because really, know, we'll have to see. We got what we needed to do done today. We need to be able to move this thing around so we can put equipment away for the winter. So we'll probably, being that we got a nice week coming up, we'll probably take some time and actually go ahead and clean out the lines, get a new fuel pump, and just put it back the way it ought to be. So, but I'm pretty pleased. Sounds good. Good oil pressure. Yeah. The old Loadstar lives to fight another day. If you like this video and the other ones that we've put out over the past 8-9 months, like us, subscribe to us, follow us on social media, and we'll see you the next time on Camp Chaos Chronicles.